Without further ado, the first thing Spice and Wolf's second OP does is bring us right back to the beginning, when Holo met Sally, I mean Lawrence. This take on their meeting frames things a little differently, and I'm not entirely happy with the changes they've made. Instead of meeting in a field, Lawrence and Holo are framed on a riverbank, and everything around them is a soft blue. As was established in the last OP, blue is Holo's color, so it's almost like Lawrence is surrounded with her aura. The effect is overwhelming, not in a good way, and Lawrence is certainly feeling that as he stares up at her, slack-jawed, like he's staring into the face of God, waiting for her approving smile. I suppose this gives us a sense of her divine nature, but the careful balance between them that was maintained throughout the first OP is pretty much thrown out the window here to focus exclusively on Holo. Like, this is the only shot we see of Lawrence where they're not sharing a frame. Plus, they've tossed the whole idea that each of them owns half of the screen out the window. I'd be okay with this if it was representative of a change in the show itself, but while Season 2 of Spice and Wolf plays with their power dynamics in interesting ways, it always keeps Lawrence and Holo in balance. It seems more likely that someone up the ladder at the studio decided that moe wolf girls are more marketable than scruffy merchants and decided to play up Holo's role, but that's just my cynicism speaking, and I don't want to belabor the point. Let's move on to what the OP does well. The sun starts cresting over the horizon as Lawrence's cart rolls onward, and then we cut to Holo sleeping on the bed of a river as a jumble of autumn leaves floats over her. She awakens, then moves to get up, and we see her arise from the back of Lawrence's cart and look up at the sun. Then she steps out of bed at the Kumerson Inn to begin her day. There's an obvious cutesy surface interpretation here. Holo is dreaming, and the motion of the cart makes her imagine that she's caught up in a stream, but there's a more interesting angle to it. Holo is lying undisturbed as time flows on around her until autumn rolls around. Remember that autumn colors are tied to craft, so this could symbolize how he gave her a chance to start moving forward again. In the following shot, her attention is drawn to a warm yellow sun, and when she gets out of bed, she's following the falling leaves. Metaphors aside, this is a beautiful example of montage editing, and it brings us seamlessly to this shot of Holo walking through the countryside. As she strolls along, we see the town of Pazlo, where she met Lawrence, give way to the larger town of Kumerson, and finally the massive walled city of Lenos. Not only does this parallel their journey through the season, it presents Holo's immortality in an interesting way. She marches onward unchanged and indifferent, while in the background human society marches forward by leaps and bounds, from villages to towns to cities. One thing this OP does a little better than the first one is pace out the character shots more gradually instead of packing them all in at the end. Unfortunately, most of them are a little lighter on details about the characters themselves. Here we're introduced to Kraft's merchant friend Mark Cole as he sits by the fire with his family. The way that the dim light boxes them into this cozy setting gives the impression that Mark is an honest man who cares deeply for his kin. The rapidly turning pages of the books in Deanna's study give us a sense of passing time and sync up with the boats bobbing behind Kraft and Holo as they make their fateful deal with Eve at the harbor. This in turn gives way to spiraling autumn leaves which transform into pigeon feathers blowing through Deanna's home as she and Guy sit reading her books. This shot gives the impression that Guy is a pensive type, while Deanna is more relaxed and aloof, as though she always has full command of her situation. That's certainly true during the events in Kumerson. In Lenos, the innkeeper Eklund sits alone nursing a drink and reminiscing about the time when his inn, and by extension the city, was a lively and bustling place. He's broken out of his reverie, though, as Eve approaches him to discuss their shady plans for the town's fur trade. The contrasting details between the scene in Eklund's memories and the present state of the bar create the impression that they're engaged in some sort of trade, even when you're not up to that point in the show yet. With crates stacked up to the ceiling, the room takes on the appearance of a warehouse. Here, finally, we get a match cut with a bit more to dissect. We jump from priests at the church in Lenos doling out food to beggars to Lawrence and Holo dancing together in Kumerson's festival, and then at last to the merchants of Daring Trading Company taking a theatrical bow to their new guests. What's the connecting thread? It's all performance. The church makes a show out of being generous, while really they're plotting to seize even more power in the city. The merchants make a show of being gracious and welcoming, but they'd gladly sell a person into service in order to turn a profit. And of course, the performance aspect of the dance is obvious. Next, we see a Marty rolling into town on his giant cart. He stands alone, reflecting his disdain for the connections that allow other merchants to build their fortunes. We can also see this as him being taken for a ride by Holo and Lawrence, as the spinning wheel of his cart is match cut with them dancing. In the show, they do take him for almost all he's worth, which he fully deserves since he's a little turd. Anyway, the shot of Holo and Lawrence dancing with all the other couples spinning around them is quite lovely, and the way it continues in the privacy of their room at the inn shows that it's something deeper than just being caught up in the spirit of the festival. The similar framing and continuing motion implies that even when dancing in the street, they're lost in their own little world. This is reinforced with a match cut to Rigoro and the nun Merta enjoying a break in Rigoro's private garden, another little world that only the two of them share. Holo and Lawrence look on as voyeurs from outside, and the placement of Kraft's hand makes him seem wistful, as though he longs for that kind of simplicity in his own life. Helena polishes off a tankard of beer as her customers cheer her on. It's a great show of her boisterous personality and confidence, as well as the kind of charisma one needs to trade in information and run a bar professionally. And now we come back to our main couple in a scene taken straight from the second OVA, where Lawrence feeds Holo as she lies sick in bed. What really makes this shot is how Holo holds onto the spoon as Lawrence tries to pull it away, like a dog clinging to a bone. I mean, I complain about the shift to focus on cute girls, but it still gets me, damn it. The climactic shot shows Eve sailing a ship away from Lenos on choppy seas as the city goes up in flames. The animation of the sleet blowing past her and her cloak being buffeted by the wind is pretty impressive, and the flurry of motion as we zoom in gives an impression that she's an agent of chaos. She's very clearly in her element with the city rioting, and from the cold glare she shoots back at us, we can tell that she's not to be trifled with. If Lawrence had seen this OP, he'd have known that he couldn't trust her as far as he could throw her. In the last shot, the chaos dies down and the music mellows out as Lawrence and Holo join hands, ready to face the world at each other's side. It's a beautiful shot to end on, reminding us of their strange but powerful bond, and foreshadowing that by the end of the season, their feelings will come to some kind of fruition, which is definitely satisfying to watch unfold. And that's it. Unfortunately, a lot of what's in this OP is kind of obvious on a surface level, and most of the connecting shots are pretty basic as well. It seems like a lot of shots were chosen to sync with the music rather than to convey any particular meaning. There are a few really good shots and edits, but on the whole there's just not as much here as there was in the first OP, and it's not quite as well put together either. Still, it's solidly made and accompanied by a great song. It's a good opening, just not quite as amazing as the first was under scrutiny.